words, I was once afraid of people saying, "Who does she think she is?" Now I have the courage to stand up and say, "This is who I am." Who said this? Some American people in the room? Sorry? Not Michelle Obama, but quite close from a spiritual perspective. Oprah. What does Oprah have in common with our next speaker, you may ask? Let me tell you, I believe that our speaker may one day have the same impact of women of her generation. She is content and brand manager at DEPT, and although she does not call herself a feminist, women's rights are quite important to her, and she hates inequality and injustice. But sometimes things are not black or white. What if people don't know that they behave unjust? What if people are not conscious of their wrongdoing? And do we all somehow prefer men over women? Let's dig deeper together with our next speaker. A big round of applause for Eileen.
All right. Better late than never, I guess. All right, imagine this. You're at a comedy night, surprise acts, everything. I walk on stage. Honestly, how would you feel? Full disclosure, if I were to be in the audience, I'd be quite disappointed. I mean, a female comedian, we all know that women aren't that funny. And the same type of judgment happens when I'm driving on the highway, for example. I'm in the fast lane, and somebody in front of me is driving terribly slow. I think to myself, must be a woman driving. And to verify if this is actually true, I look over my shoulder while passing, and if it's indeed a woman, I think, see, I was right. And I see people smirking here because we know the stereotypes, we know the jokes. They're funny because they're true, right? However, when I stand on stage, such as today, being incredibly nervous, or I'm driving a car myself, sometimes it suddenly hits me. I mean, you notice I am a woman, and at that point I think, oh shit, maybe this isn't that funny at all. When I was working as a journalist many years ago, I had to interview this big shot CEO of a real estate company. Pretty nerve-wracking at the time. So I walk into this majestic mansion type of room where he was seated, and mind you, when I said CEO, most of you were already thinking of a man. But he was seated there, and he looks at me, and he actually says, when they said they were going to send the journalists, I expected an older man. Now, in that moment, I realized that based on stereotypes and being a woman, I was already 10 points behind. So I tried to correct that wrong I thought I'd made during the interview, namely not being that capable male journalist. And this resulted in me name-dropping a lot of real estate terms I Googled shortly beforehand, laughing at his jokes, leaning in a little bit more just to make him feel like he was telling the most compelling story ever. And obviously, I wasn't too critical of his answers because I wanted him to like me, or at least appreciate me. Now, I know that when he said, I expected an older man, he probably meant it as some sort of joke. And I'm not here to tell you that gender-related jokes aren't allowed anymore, or that I hate all of them, although I do think there are better ones. But we do need to realize that in these jokes and in this behavior, there's bias, which is a stereotype aimed at a certain group, in this case, gender. And we live by it so automatically, thinking it can do no harm, that it becomes part of our unconsciousness. The unconsciousness of men and the unconsciousness of women. Hence, unconscious gender bias. Now, I'm also not here to tell you that having these biases is wrong. It's actually quite natural. They are embedded in all of us. Humans tend to make decisions based on the knowledge they have gathered via many sources over the years. And the brain processes this to form opinions and make decisions. And eventually, it creates shortcuts to form assumptions. Now, you can imagine that when you grow up with jokes and remarks that women aren't funny, they're terrible drivers, or they suck at math, or you only encounter certain professions in the shape of a man, that becomes part of your system and unconscious gender bias happens. Now, we can accept its existence, but if we do so, it will not only lead our jokes, but also our decisions. We will be overlooking a truth without us even knowing it. And that's quite difficult to change. Well, change is exactly what we need. Because our unconscious gender bias is holding us back from achieving our aim of gender equality, especially in the workplace. And I hope this is not something I have to convince you of, because this happens. I can show you countless images of research published that actually show that gender bias is happening at the moment. And I'm going through it quickly right now, because it's quite a lot. But what these facts don't actually show us is how it influences our behavior and our surroundings all the time. So let me try with an example. There's this riddle, which is fairly well known, so if you know the answer already, please hold back a little bit so others have no time to think about it. There's this riddle of a son and a dad getting into a car accident. I see people smile here and like, yeah, I know this one. But they get into a car accident, they hit a tree, and the dad dies instantly. The son lives, but has to go to the hospital for surgery. However, in the hospital, the surgeon says, "I'm sorry, I cannot perform surgery because this is my son." How is that possible? In the context of this talk, the answer is probably evident. But when I presented this riddle a while ago to two female friends of mine, one studying medicine at the time, they needed a good 10 minutes of hard thinking before they came up with the answer. And their answer, open-minded as they were, was, it's a gay couple. The son has two dads. Not one, not even the one studying medicine, possibly becoming a surgeon herself, thought of the possibility that a surgeon could also be a woman. So when we associate certain professions with men, such as surgeons, journalists, presidents, and CEOs, even though we're well aware of the fact that women are perfectly capable of doing the exact same thing, we are letting our unconscious gender bias lead our views. These are jobs we know in men, not in women. So why do we need to change that? Well, basically, because we suffer from it, both men and women. Because even though we've been trying to shift the dominance of masculinity in the workplace, numbers still show that the amount of women in leadership positions is still quite low, and women in professions that are dominantly considered male are left at a disadvantage. Think about it. How many female leaders do you actually know? And that's a waste, because gender equality comes with many benefits. Moreover, investors nowadays demand proper gender representation before they invest. And that's with good reason. It has been shown that adding women to boards of directors increases profit, and advancing women's equality in the workplace reduces the risk of bankruptcy and can add trillions of dollars to the GDP. So, quick solution. Just add more women, right? Well, obviously I agree with that. But this is where our unconscious gender bias withholds us from making the right decisions. Making that many heard phrase, well, but you just have to hire the right person for the job, right? Quite difficult, as our biases will often favor men over women. I mean, we already associate certain professions with men, And that comes including the professional qualities. Think outgoing, charismatic, natural born leader, inspiring, hard worker, and so on. So no wonder that if you're looking for a certain profile, you will unconsciously end up hiring more men. Even more so when you still address women with the soft skills they're usually known for, say empathetic, caring, serving, great listeners, friendly, and so on. But obviously, not all women are the same. So sometimes, or maybe even more, quite often, we encounter women that seem to have those considered male-like qualities I just described. And if that happens, unconsciously, something's off in our heads. There's a mismatch. Take Heidi Roizen, for example. She's an existing lady. She's a venture capitalist based in Silicon Valley. And she built a successful business from the ground up using her great networking skills and her outgoing personality, amongst others, obviously. And to test whether those considered male-like skills actually influence the way people view her, her story became part of a case study performed at Columbia Business School. So there's this professor who has a group of students and he splits them in two. Both groups are mixed men and women. One group reads about the actual story of Heidi Roizen and how she built her business and how she runs it nowadays. And the other group gets the exact same story, but it's about a fictional character named Howard. And the good news is, the students rated Heidi and Howard equally competent. However, they liked Howard, and they wanted to work for Howard. And Heidi, not so much. So what happened? The more assertive a student found Heidi to be, the more they rejected her. They perceived her as more selfish than her male equivalent, Howard. And the essence of the case study actually shows that there's a negative correlation between women and power and success, whereas that correlation for men is positive. So there's a mismatch between the qualities we traditionally associate with leadership and the qualities we traditionally associate with women, making female leadership quite difficult. So on the one hand, we have this perception of what traditional leadership is supposed to look like, and we appreciate that in men, but not in women. But on the other hand, we have a lot of women, and men for that matter, trying to lead in a different way. But that often leads to rejection as well. So do you see what's going on here? There's no right way to go. Now, I'm not solely blaming men here. Both men and women suffer from their unconscious gender bias. And you can imagine that with that knowledge in mind, we tend to make the same decisions over and over again, meaning organizations will remain homogeneous at the top. So if we really want to improve on gender equality and yield the benefits of that, we have to consciously address, identify, and recognize our unconscious gender bias, individually and collectively. Now I know that this is a challenge and it will take a lot of time. But luckily, time is on our side. Already, traditional role model patterns are shifting, and more companies are addressing their gender bias. And they use that newly found knowledge and awareness to consciously approach women in the workplace, be it when selecting board members, managers, doing progress reviews, or salary negotiations. And my call to action here today is do the same. And this is difficult because it's not an exact science, and we're all human here. But eventually, it will provide us with the role models we need to empower and benefit the next generation. I know it works because seeing women excel, each in their own way, in what they do best, made me change my unconscious gender bias. No longer will a phrase like, I expected an older man, get under my skin. Expect an older man now? Well, luckily, someone better just showed up. Eventually, I want the next generations, the generation of kids my friends are currently raising right now, I want them to grow up in a world where driving like a woman isn't necessarily seen as something dangerous, or where female comedians aren't seen as not funny. I want to live in a world where where throwing like a woman, or dealing like a woman, or leading like a woman isn't considered a bad thing. And while we can expect women to push boundaries when it comes to improving our gender bias and creating equal opportunities, men can and must be part of this conversation as well. Even when just telling jokes. We're in this together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Eileen. I saw the men clapping as hard as the women, so I think you made a message.